Penelope Avery didn't expect her night shift at the downtown clinic to involve a half-conscious man in a $1,000 suit collapsing onto her. "Sir, hey, sir, stay with me," she shouted, catching his weight as best she could before he sank to the floor. He was burning up, his skin clammy, his breath shallow. "Can someone grab a gurney?" The man didn't answer. His eyes fluttered open for a second, just enough for her to catch their icy blue color. Then they rolled back and he passed out completely. 15 minutes later, he was hooked up to an Roman 4, his jacket tossed over the back of a chair, his shoes custom, probably Italian, lined neatly beneath the bed. Penelope sat beside him, watching the monitor beep steadily. His fever was high and his body was clearly overworked. She'd seen this before: burnout, exhaustion, zero sleep, and too much caffeine. But never in someone dressed like he just walked off the cover of a magazine. "What kind of man works himself into the ground like this?" she muttered, adjusting the blanket over his chest. Right on cue, the man stirred. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. "Where am I?" "You're at the Easton Free Clinic," she said gently, leaning closer. "You collapsed in the waiting room. You've got a fever and probably haven't eaten in a day." "Ring any bells?" He glanced around, confused, then winced and pressed a hand to his forehead. I had a meeting uptown. My driver dropped me off and then," he groaned. "That's the last thing I remember." "Well, you're not going anywhere tonight. You need fluids, rest, and food that doesn't come in a takeout box." He looked at her for the first time, really looked, and Penelope felt a jolt run through her. His face was sharp, almost too handsome to be real, with a chiseled jaw and dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. He didn't look like the kind of man who ended up in a free clinic. He looked like the kind of man who owned the building it was in. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to shake the weird tension in her chest. He hesitated. "Zayden Thorne." Penelope blinked. "Like the Zayden Thorne? Depends," he murmured, voice gravelly. "How many do you know?" She stared at him. "You're the CEO of Thorne Tech. I guess you've heard of it," he said, eyes closing again. "Heard of it. You're one of the most powerful men in this city. You're in Forbes every other month." "Yeah," he muttered, "and none of that matters if I'm dead." Penelope folded her arms, studying him. "Do your assistants know you're here?" "No." "Your family?" "No." She raised an eyebrow. "So you just collapsed in public and didn't think anyone should be notified?" He cracked one eye open. "Are you always this bossy?" "Only when billionaires nearly die in my clinic." He stared at her for a beat. Then, to her surprise, he actually laughed, a low, raspy sound that made her stomach flutter. "Penelope," she said, trying to refocus, "I'm your nurse tonight. And I'm not letting you leave until your fever's gone and you've had a proper meal." Zayden looked her up and down, scrubs, no makeup, her curly ponytail pulled through the back of her cap. She didn't look like the women he usually encountered, polished, cold, calculating. She looked real. "I'll behave," he said softly. "If you stay." Penelope blinked. "Excuse me?" "Stay, just for a while." His voice dipped, quieter. "It's been a long day." She hesitated, then nodded, pulling the chair closer. By morning, he was sitting up in bed, sipping the coffee Penelope had brought him from the vending machine. "It's terrible," he said, grimacing. "Clinic special," she grinned. "You want a kwasa too, Your Highness?" He shot her a look. "You don't get intimidated easily, do you?" "Nope. Especially not by men who pass out in front of me." He shook his head, smiling. "I'm supposed to be in meetings right now. You're supposed to be resting. I have a company to run. You have a body that's about to give out if you don't slow down." He stared at her again, and this time it wasn't casual. There was something else behind his gaze, a curiosity, a pull. "You always talk to patients like this?" he asked. "Only the stubborn ones." Zayden leaned back, watching her. "You're different." Penelope shrugged. "That's what everyone says before they stop calling." He frowned. "Sounds like you've dated some idiots," she snorted. "You'd be right." Zayden paused, then reached into the drawer beside him. He pulled out a sleek black wallet and slid out a card. "I want you to have this." Penelope stared down at the card. It had his name on it, embossed in silver. No title, no company, just a private number. "What is this?" "My direct line, in case you ever need anything." "I'm not taking money from you." "It's not about money," he said quietly. You helped me. No one else would have treated me like a human being last night. You didn't care who I was, you just cared. She looked up at him, unsure what to say. I'm not asking for anything, he added. I'd like to see you again. Penelope's heart thudded. Zayden, I know you don't date patients, he said quickly, but I'm not sick anymore and I won't show up at your job, just think about it. She stared at the card, her fingers tightening around it. You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life. Penelope didn't know what to say. She'd spent the last 2 years building walls around her heart. She didn't date, didn't trust easily. Especially not men with power, charm, and the kind of fortune that came with headlines and scandals. But Zayden Thorne wasn't what she expected. And somehow, she wasn't sure she wanted to say no. 3 days later, Penelope was elbow-deep in paperwork at the nurse's station, trying to ignore the persistent tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with stress and everything to do with the card tucked inside her locker. She hadn't called, hadn't even looked at it again. She told herself it was better that way. Simple, safe, Miss Avery, one of the receptionists called out, waving a clipboard. There's someone here asking for you. Penelope glanced up, frowning. Who? He didn't give a name, just said it was important, she sighed. Tell him I'm with patients, he's already inside. Penelope stepped into the hallway just in time to see a man in a tailored navy coat speaking with one of the interns. Her pulse jumped before she even saw his face. Should have known you'd ignore my card, Zayden said, turning toward her. She crossed her arms. This is a clinic, not your boardroom. You can't just walk in here. I didn't come to cause a scene, he said. I came to make a request. You couldn't do that through your assistant? I don't use assistants for personal things. Penelope narrowed her eyes. And this is personal? I'd like to take you to dinner, he said. Tonight, she stared at him. Are you serious? I've already made the reservation. I'll wait outside when your shift ends. You really don't hear no often, do you? I do, he said calmly. I just don't let it end the conversation. She should have told him to leave. She should have laughed, walked away, buried herself in charts, and left him standing there. Instead, she found herself staring at the set of his jaw, the faint shadows under his eyes, the way his voice had softened just enough to make it feel like he wasn't used to asking for things like this. You have 1 hour, she said finally, and I'm not wearing heels. Zayden's mouth twitched. You'll be perfect as you are. When she stepped out through the clinic's side door that evening, he was leaning against a sleek black car with tinted windows, his coat now replaced by a dark suit that looked like it cost more than her rent. A driver opened the door without being prompted. You brought a chauffeur, she asked, sliding in beside him. I wasn't sure how persuasive I'd be. The car glided through the city as the sun dipped behind the skyline. She tried not to stare at him. Tried not to wonder why he looked so at ease in silence while her brain was rattling around in a dozen different directions. The last time she'd worn lip gloss was for a friend's wedding. The last time she'd been in a car like this. Never. They pulled up outside a restaurant where the name wasn't even on the building, just dark glass, gold trim, and a doorman who opened her door like she was royalty. You didn't tell me this was one of those places, she muttered as they stepped inside. You didn't ask. The host greeted Zayden by name and led them to a private dining alcove separated by velvet curtains. Penelope sank into the plush chair, trying not to feel like she just stepped into another world. How often do you do this? She asked, eyeing the crystal water glass in front of her. Dinner, convince women to say yes when they clearly know better. He met her gaze. I don't usually have to convince them. Well, I'm not them, I know, he said. That's the point. She glanced down at the menu. There were no prices, just ingredients arranged like poetry. Do you ever do normal things? She asked, folding the menu shut. Like laundry, grocery shopping. I have people for that. Of course you do, but I used to, he added. Before the company took off, before the investors, back when I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment over a bakery in Brooklyn, she blinked. He nodded. I built the first prototype in that apartment. I paid for parts by delivering pizzas on weekends. Penelope studied him, caught off guard. What happened? I sold the software to a defense contractor. They offered me a buyout. I negotiated instead and ended up on magazine covers. I ended up with 100 employees depending on me and a reason not to sleep. The waiter arrived, breaking the moment. Zayden ordered something in French. Penelope ordered the only dish she recognized. When the food came, it looked like art. She picked at it, still unsure how to find footing in a situation that felt more like a dream than a night out. "You're not saying much," Zayden said once the waiter left again. "I don't usually have dinner with people who own private jets. I don't usually have dinner with women who challenge everything I say. Then maybe we're both out of our element." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It hummed like something waiting to tip into something else. He leaned back, watching her. "I'm not asking you to change for me, Penelope. I'm not asking you to fix me either." "I don't want to fix you," he said. "I just want to know you." She set her fork down, her appetite long gone. "Why? Because when I woke up in that clinic, you were the first person in a long time who didn't see me as a walking headline." Her throat tightened. "And if I don't want to be part of your world, then I'll keep showing up in yours until you tell me to stop." She stared at him, heart hammering for reasons she didn't fully understand. This wasn't a man used to waiting. He didn't chase, he didn't linger, but somehow he was doing both. And the scariest part, she didn't want him to stop. Penelope didn't say yes to a second dinner, but she didn't say no either. What she did say was, "I'm not ready for whatever this is." And Zayden had only nodded in response, as if he already understood that patience was the only way forward with her. That was 6 days ago, 6 days where she hadn't seen his name in any headlines. 6 days where the card he gave her stayed untouched at the bottom of her bag, buried beneath loose change and granola bar wrappers. 6 days of telling herself she wasn't thinking about him, even though she checked over her shoulder every time the clinic doors opened. It wasn't until the clinic's director called her into his office that everything changed. "You've been requested," Dr. Halston said, not bothering to look up from his tablet. Penelope frowned. "Requested? A patient is funding a new mobile health van. Wants you to oversee the rollout," she blinked. "Wait, what?" "He's already signed off on the donation. 7 figures. Penelope's jaw dropped. "You're joking." "He was insistent, said he wouldn't fund it unless you were in charge of the program." Dr. Halston finally looked up. "Do you know Zayden Thorne?" Her stomach twisted. Yes." He left a direct contact. "If you're not interested, I can assign someone else." "I didn't. I never asked him to do this." Dr. Halston gave her a look. "Do you want the role or not?" She left the office with her head spinning. Outside, the air was brittle with early spring chill, and Penelope barely noticed the wind biting at her neck as she rounded the corner of the building. A black car was waiting by the curb. Of course it was. The passenger side window rolled down, revealing Zayden behind tinted glass. "I was hoping you'd come out the front." She crossed her arms. "You donated $1 million just to get my attention." He stepped out of the car, his coat open over a dark gray sweater that made him look disarmingly casual. "That van will help hundreds of people," he said. "I just moved the timeline up." "That's not the point." "Then tell me the point." "You can't throw money at me and expect me to follow you like some." "I don't expect anything," he cut in gently, "but I won't apologize for using my resources to do something good. And if it means I see you again in the process, I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry about that." Penelope's breath caught. "You made this impossible. I offered you a job on a project you're more qualified to run than anyone else in that building. That's not impossible. That's asking you to lead." She looked away, heat crawling under her skin. "You don't even know me." Zayden's voice dropped lower. "I know you stayed with a stranger through the night, refused to be impressed by his bank account, and still brought him the worst coffee in the city with a straight face." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was she wanted to see him again. She wanted to know what it felt like to be wanted by someone who didn't flinch when she pushed back. He stepped closer. "Come see the van with me." "That's all I'm asking." 20 minutes later, they were in a private garage beneath a downtown building that Penelope was fairly certain had more cameras than most banks. The van was parked near the far wall, sleek and state-of-the-art, with gleaming white panels and tinted windows. "I had them model it after the ones used by Doctors Without Borders," Zayden said, unlocking the rear doors with a key fob. It has a full exam room, refrigeration units for vaccines, and solar backup power. Penelope stepped inside, the scent of new leather and fresh paint filling her nose. This is incredible. You'll be able to reach neighborhoods that don't have clinics within miles, he said, watching her reaction. You told me on our first night that people slip through the cracks. I figured this might help catch a few. She turned slowly to face him. You remembered that? I remember everything you say. There was something raw in his voice now, nothing polished or practiced, just truth. I don't know what you want from me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to do this right, he said simply. No pressure, no expectations. Just let me be in your life, even if it's only on the sidelines at first. Penelope swallowed hard. And if I say yes, then I'll show you what it looks like when someone shows up and stays. That night, she found herself staring at her apartment ceiling, the glow of the streetlight casting shadows across the room. The van, his words. All of it pressed against her chest like a weight and a promise. She didn't want him. She didn't want to need anyone. But for the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to fix her or change her or push her aside. He just wanted to know her. And that terrified her far more than anything else ever had. The spring rollout of the mobile health unit began quietly, no press, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just Penelope arriving early to the garage with a clipboard and sleeves rolled up. She was used to doing everything herself. Coordinating vaccinations, mapping underserved neighborhoods, scheduling volunteer shifts. What she wasn't used to was Zayden showing up unannounced with 2 extra folding tables and a generator in the back of his SUV. You're not on the volunteer list, she said, watching him unload supplies in a gray Henley and jeans that looked a little too new for manual labor. I didn't sign up, he said. I just showed up. You're going to regret it once you're standing in the sun for 6 hours. I've regretted worse things. She handed him a stack of intake forms. You're folding these. He didn't argue. Just sat on the edge of the van's open doors, legs stretched out, folding papers with practiced precision. It became a rhythm. Every Saturday he was there before she arrived, never announcing himself, never drawing attention, just helping, listening. Watching her organize chaos with a steady hand and a sharper tongue. He didn't flirt, he didn't push, he just stayed. And somewhere between the 3rd site visit and the 5th, Penelope stopped bracing for the moment he'd disappear. It wasn't until the day they were packing up after a long shift in Far Rockaway that she caught him watching her with something different in his expression. Not admiration, not curiosity, something quieter, more certain. You look exhausted, he said, handing her a bottle of water. Comes with the job, let me take you somewhere. I'm covered in sunscreen, sweat, and at least one toddler's sneeze. I'm not asking for a gala, he said, just a drive. She hesitated, then nodded. He didn't take her to a restaurant or a penthouse. He drove them out to an inlet just past the Verrazano Bridge, where the sound of the city gave way to waves slapping against the rocks. The sun was low, casting gold across the water. He spread a wool blanket across the hood of his car and unpacked food from a canvas bag, roasted vegetables, her favorite sparkling lemonade, and a box of baklava. She sat beside him, toes brushing the gravel. You always this full of surprises? She asked. Only when I'm trying to impress someone. You think this impresses me? No, he said. I think it makes you feel seen. She didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at her hair and she didn't bother to fix it. I'm not like the women you probably know, she said after a long pause. Zayden didn't look away from the water. I know. I don't wear silk. I don't network. I don't like being the center of anything. I'm not asking you to be. I've been on my own a long time. I don't want to take that from you. I want to be beside you. She turned to look at him. Really look. He wasn't dazzling tonight. No tailored suit or sleek car waiting behind a velvet rope. Just a man who showed up again and again with his sleeves rolled and his walls low. I'm scared, she said, so quietly it almost wasn't real. So am I. She reached for his hand. He didn't flinch. He just closed his fingers around hers like it had always been that way. That moment changed everything. The weeks that followed happened fast. Not because they rushed, because they stopped resisting. He brought her to his world slowly. introduced her to his board members at a quiet dinner without cameras, took her hand at a philanthropy auction where she wore a borrowed dress and still managed to silence an entire room just by walking in beside him. He didn't parade her. He protected her. And she, in turn, gave him something no one else ever had: peace. By early summer, they stood on the rooftop of his downtown building, where he'd arranged a small gathering to celebrate the expansion of the mobile unit program. She expected a few donors, maybe a speech. What she didn't expect was the lights dimming, music softening, and Zayden turning toward her with something steady in his eyes. "Come with me," he said. He led her to the far corner of the rooftop, where a small garden of white hydrangeas swayed in the warm air. On the stone ledge sat a single velvet box. "I didn't know how to do this," he said, voice quiet. "Not in the way you deserved. I thought about Paris, I thought about fireworks, but none of that felt right." Because this wasn't about making a statement. She stared at him, breath caught in her chest. "This is about waking up every morning knowing I'll never have to wonder what it means to be loved by you," he said, "and never letting you wonder what it means to be chosen by me." He opened the box. The ring wasn't flashy, it was delicate, thoughtful, a single diamond set in a gold band shaped like two hands holding each other. "I want to marry you, Penelope, not because I need you to fit into my world, but because I finally found someone I want to build a new one with." The rooftop went still. She didn't cry, she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Yes." The applause that followed was distant, background noise. Because all she could hear was the sound of his heartbeat against her cheek and the rush of knowing for once. She hadn't waited for the other shoe to drop, and it never would. They married 8 weeks later in a garden outside the city, beneath strings of lights and the scent of jasmine. No press. No spectacle, just friends, vows, and hands that never let go. Zayden kissed her like the world had finally stopped spinning. And for the first time in her life, Penelope didn't feel like she was tending to someone else's wounds. She felt whole, chosen, loved. The morning of their wedding anniversary, Penelope woke to find the other side of the bed empty and warm. Sunlight streamed through the gauzy curtains of their townhouse, the ones she'd picked out herself after stubbornly refusing Zayden's decorator's velvet drapes. The soft scent of espresso drifted from downstairs, accompanied by faint jazz playing from the kitchen. She patted down barefoot, expecting to find him at the stove like she often did on Sundays. Instead, a single envelope with her name in his handwriting sat on the counter beside her coffee mug. Penelope put on something comfortable, not scrubs, not a dress. "Something you'd wear if you didn't have to impress anyone. I'll be waiting." She raised an eyebrow but smiled. He never gave commands, just invitations. And they always came with something unexpected. An hour later, she stepped outside wearing jeans and a light sweater, her curls tucked beneath a cap. A glossy black motorcycle sat at the curb, gleaming in the early sun. Zayden leaned against it, helmet in one hand, aviator sunglasses in place. "You bought another one?" she asked, eyeing the machine. "I restored this one," he said. "Took me 6 months. Didn't want to show you until it was finished. You've been sneaking off to a garage without telling me. I needed a hobby that didn't involve board meetings or algorithms." She laughed, accepting the extra helmet. "Where are we going?" "I figured I'd take you somewhere no one knows your name." No patience, no reporters, just quiet. She swung her leg over the seat behind him. "I'm listening." He didn't tell her where they were headed. The road wound north, away from the city, through hills scattered with wildflowers and sleepy towns untouched by glass skyscrapers. By the time they reached the lake house nestled between 2 ancient oaks, Penelope was fully convinced he'd bought the entire shoreline. "This place is yours?" she asked as he helped her off the bike. "I built it." During the same stretch of time, I was rebuilding the bike. Penelope turned slowly, taking in the wraparound porch, the weathered wood siding, the hammock strung between the trees. "You did this without telling me. You said you never had a place to go when you needed air," he said softly. "Now you do." Inside, the house was cozy but modern, whitewashed walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, a fireplace already crackling to life. There were no signs of opulence, no designer labels. Just soft blankets, shelves filled with books, and a framed photo from the mobile unit's first day. Penelope laughing, clipboard in hand, hair in a messy bun. She turned to him, speechless. "I wanted to build something that felt like you," he said. "Not like the version of you the world sees. The real one." She stepped closer, her hands against his chest. "You remembered the photo." "I remember everything." Instead of replying, she pulled him down into a kiss that tasted of every quiet, unspoken promise they'd made over the last year. When they broke apart, her voice was low. "Do we have to go back?" "Not until you're ready." They stayed for 3 days. No phones, no emails, just long mornings wrapped in blankets, late afternoons fishing from the dock, and nights tracing each other's skin like familiar maps. Somewhere between the second night and the third morning, Penelope realized she'd stopped waiting for something to go wrong. It was the first time she'd ever let herself believe in permanence. Back in the city, the mobile program expanded again, this time reaching rural communities outside the state. Penelope took on a new leadership role, one that kept her in the field but allowed her to train a younger team. She didn't want to stop working, but for once she didn't have to do it alone. Zayden, meanwhile, scaled back from daily operations at Thorne Tech. He took on mentorship roles, invested in medical startups, and began working with a nonprofit that helped young engineers gain access to real-world labs. But his favorite meetings, he often said, were the ones with her over takeout on their couch, solving staffing shortages with a shared spreadsheet and a bottle of red wine. They didn't live in the penthouse anymore. 6 months after their anniversary, they moved into a brownstone with creaky stairs and a lemon tree on the balcony. It wasn't the biggest place they could afford. It was just the one that felt most like home. One rainy afternoon, Penelope came home to find Zayden in the kitchen, flour dusting his sleeves, dough rising on the counter. "You're baking bread now. I heard it's good for stress." She dropped her bag by the door, eyeing the bowl skeptically. "You even own a cookbook." "I'm improvising." She leaned against the counter beside him. "You're not going to suggest we open a bakery next, are you? Only if you're my partner." She rolled her eyes. "You'd burn down the kitchen in a week." "I'd still be the luckiest man alive." Later that night, curled in bed with his arm around her waist and the window cracked open to let in the rain, she traced the curve of his wrist with her fingertips. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. "No, what changed?" "You did," he said. "The second I met you, everything else lost its shape. I stopped caring about being brilliant or winning or proving something. I just wanted to be worthy of staying in your life." She turned to face him, voice thick. "You never had to prove anything." "Still," he whispered, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand, "I would have crossed every line to keep you." She kissed him, slow and deep, her fingers tangling in his shirt. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, the kind of sleep that only comes when there's nowhere else you'd rather be. Years passed. The mobile unit became a national program. New cities, new leaders. Penelope stepped back from the front lines but stayed close to the mission. Zayden launched a foundation that funded community health innovation. He never took credit for it publicly. On a quiet Tuesday morning, they stood in a sun-drenched nursery, watching their daughter reach for the stuffed giraffe in her crib. Her hair was dark like his, her eyes bright like Penelope's. Zayden picked her up, lifting her high before settling her against his shoulder. "She already has your stubbornness," he said. "Good. She'll need it." He turned to her with a look he reserved only for these moments when the world quieted and everything they'd built stood still for just a breath. "I still can't believe you said yes." Penelope stepped into his arms, her hand resting lightly against their daughter's back. "Of course I did," she murmured. "You were the only one who ever saw me." And as the morning light poured in, as laughter echoed off the walls of a home they'd built from trust and second chances, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a love story, it was the life that came after. And it was beautiful.